Hi, this is Melody Payne of melodypayne.com, and you are listening to the Musicality podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musicality. Welcome to the Musicality podcast. On this episode, I'm excited to be joined by Melody Payne, aka the Plucky Pianista. Melody has been writing online since 2012, sharing innovative and forward-thinking ideas for teaching music more effectively. In this conversation, we talk a lot about getting off-book, meaning being able to play even without the note-by-note sheet music in front of you. Melody shares an impactful early experience with a performance that went wrong, and how she eventually learned to handle musical mistakes with grace. She found a great way to get started playing by ear and improvising with a friend, and that led on to wanting to equip her students with the tools needed to feel that freedom. Melody teaches two particular skills and uses a special app to help her young students quickly start playing the songs they love in their own way without needing to learn them note by note. One thing a lot of musicians struggle with is how to make their performances actually sound good, not just hitting the right notes at the right time, but actually moving the listener. Melody shares insights on her 3 rules for a magical, musical, moving performance. I also asked her about accompanying, a hot topic particularly among pianists, and closely related to this idea of getting off book. If you've ever felt limited to playing just the notes that are put in front of you, you're going to love this episode. Melody shares so openly and has real insights on getting off book. My name's Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality podcast from Musical U. Welcome to the show, Melody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. I'd love to hear, how did you first get started making music? You know, were you someone who took to it really easily, or did it take a bit more work when you were early on in your music education?
I grew up in a household with both parents who were hobby musicians. So having a piano in our home was something that had been part of our home for my entire life. And my mom played the piano. And as a matter of fact, she used to play this song when my sister and I were really, really small. And we would dance and dance and dance until we got so tired that we fell asleep and took a nap. So that having music in our house was just a normal way of life on a day-to-day basis. And my dad sang in the choir at church, and my sister and I both sang in the children's choir at church. So we had a lot of musical opportunities from day one.
Great. And how did you feel about music? Was it just kind of a natural and normal part of your life then?
It really was. And at some point when I was around 6 years old, I believe, I started going over to the piano and asking my mom to teach me things. And that lasted for a little while, but I know a lot of parents would agree that the parent-child, teacher-student relationship doesn't always work out. And that's how it went with my mom and I. So they found a local teacher for me. And my first teacher was 17 years old, and I was 7.
Wow. And how did that go for you?
It went really, really well. I was just such a little sponge. I wanted to learn everything I could and soak it all in, just any kind of music, any kind of not any kind of performance opportunity. I was a very timid performer, but any kind of music that I could practice at home by myself made me very happy.
And what do you think made you a timid performer?
My personality, probably. I have a huge tendency towards perfectionism, and I have a type A personality, and I'm also a very, very tender, sensitive person. So when you combine all of those things together, it makes performing in public pretty terrifying at times, because I don't like to make mistakes in front of other people. To me, it's still a very scary thing. And although at this point in my life as an adult, I have learned how to gracefully get past it and not make a big deal about it like I did when I was a child, but making a mistake in a recital just felt like the end of the world at that point.
Are there any experiences that particularly stand out?
One time when I was, I think, about 8 or 9 years old, I don't remember exactly how old I was, my piano teacher had been helping me learn lots of different types of music. I was assigned a very special book that was not just a method book. It was actually a hymn arrangement book. And she chose one of the songs in it for me to play in church for the first time. And of course, I was scared to death. My hands were shaking. I was just terrified, even though the church was really, really small. I think we probably had about maybe between 60 and 80 members, most of whom I was related to on top of that, but I was still scared to death. So I go up to the piano bench in the middle of the service when it was my turn to play, and I had practiced and practiced and practiced. I had pretty much memorized the entire song. And about a minute into the performance, I made some really tiny little error. I don't even remember what happened specifically, but I froze. I absolutely froze. And I couldn't figure out how to get past that moment of just being terrified. And I looked over at my parents. I remember clearly sitting there on the piano bench, looking over at my parents like, please help me. I don't know what to do. So they kind of motioned for me, okay, come sit down. You can come sit down. It's okay. And after that experience, I was just so traumatized. I didn't want to play in public ever again. And, quite honestly, that was a pivotal moment for me. And I highly doubt anyone else who was there that day has any recollection of it whatsoever. But for me, it was a very, very pivotal moment in my musical life.
I feel your pain. I can look back on not quite that dramatic, but, similar experiences of just suddenly realizing I didn't have the control I thought I did over the music I was playing. And I guess I was raised in the very kind of note-by-note system where you memorize your repertoire and then you stand up on stage and you perform it.
Yes.
And it sounds like you were in a similar situation where you hadn't necessarily been prepared either for, how to gracefully handle a mistake or how to have the inner instinct for music that lets you actually, make up a solution, even if it's not the exact right notes.
Right. I hadn't been trained in either one of those areas. And I was trained on the page. And I didn't have any experience doing anything off of the page at all whatsoever. I didn't even have the faintest idea how to begin improvising or making up a solution on the spot, as you mentioned, or just getting out of the mistake or getting out of the moment of being frozen solid. And that is something that I try my best to help my own students to be able to do, because for me, it was such an experience that I remember so clearly, even 30 plus years later.
It can leave scars, can't it? And, when we work with adult musicians at Musical U, we have a whole module dedicated to getting musical confidence. And a lot of it is about kind of visualizing and remembering and thinking through, what happens if you do make a mistake and how can you be prepared and how can you be okay with the fact that you've made mistakes in the past. So it's great to hear that's a part of what you work on with your students.
Absolutely. And to hear, that you're actually working and teaching people that it's okay that you made a mistake. That is okay. That's part of the learning process. And I do try to help my students understand that it is okay. A lot of people, especially like myself, who have the perfectionistic tendencies, have a very difficult time admitting that we made a mistake. That is a very, very difficult thing to do. So actually being able to help these kids to work through that sometimes, it's so rewarding to me because I can see myself in them so much from when I was that age. And to help them be able to work through some of these things just feels like, it feels like an honor.
Fantastic. So tell us, how did your musical life develop from there? You had this pivotal moment and realized maybe that you weren't equipped in the way you could be or should be to handle that performance situation. How did things go over the next few years?
I would not play in front of anyone. I just did not want to play in front of anyone because I was just so scared that I would find myself in that situation again. And I wouldn't know how to get out of it or how to recover. And I didn't even know there was such a thing as recovering from mistakes. In my mind, you practiced it until it was perfect. And then when you played it in front of people, it should still be perfect. But obviously that is not how music works. So it took me a little while to be encouraged by my parents enough to be willing to play in front of people again. And it wasn't because I wasn't encouraged by my parents. They were constantly saying, hey, play this for Uncle so-and-so, or play this for cousin so-and-so, when we would be at family reunions and things like that. But, I didn't want any part of that whatsoever. I was still too scared. But as I got into high school, I had a really good friend. Well, we're still really good friends to this day. His name is Brad, and he only played by ear. He didn't know how to read music, or if he did, it was very minimally. And I played only on the page. I didn't know how to play by ear or improvise. So in high school, the two of us would get together wherever we came across a piano. It didn't matter where it was. We would get together and we would sit down at the piano and we would just jam duets. And so he was teaching me how to play by ear and how to understand that, you know what, it's okay if you didn't play the correct harmony there. That is no big deal. The big thing that's important is that we're having fun. We're learning how to express ourselves as musicians. We are stepping outside the box, so to speak, of only reading music. And to me, that began a time in my life of being okay with who I was as a musician and not feeling like I had to be so scared anymore of making a mistake. So for me, it was very freeing at that time.
That's wonderful. And before we go on and talk about how your musical life was different after that, I'd love to just pause for a minute and dive in, because I think, the idea of sitting down with a friend who can play by ear and just having a jam session, I know to a lot of our audience that sounds amazing and incredibly hard to do. So would you mind can you take us back to one of those jam sessions and what it was like when you sat down with Brad and you were at the keyboard? What did that look like? What were you talking about? And how did he help you to break free of those notes on the page?
One of the main things, well, there are really two main things I remember happening, but one of the main things was that he would sit down on the bass end of the piano and he would start to play, I guess sometimes it was maybe a pop song or a hymn or something like that just centered around just a few chords. It wasn't classical music or anything like that. It was something more chord progression, very simple chord progression that repeated itself quite frequently throughout the music. And he would sit down and play the piece, and then he would have me sit down at the treble end and just start trying to match what he was doing. And of course, the first time he asked me to do that, it completely blew my mind. I had no idea where to start. It was a monumental moment. The first time that I just started paying attention to what chords he was playing. Okay, he's playing a C chord and an F and a G and maybe an A minor. And I did know enough about chords at that point that I could at least recognize what he was playing. And then using my ear, I started picking up on what the progression was. And then I just started mimicking what he was doing. And then a little while after I got used to doing that, he said, okay, now start playing the melody. And I went, uh-oh, mind blown again. But after he kept encouraging me and we kept trying and trying and rehearsing it over and over again. And after quite a few attempts, it started to feel a little bit easier. And I started to feel like, oh, this is what improvising is. This is what playing by ear is. Because up until that point, I really didn't understand what those two things meant. And it was a really big moment right there when he would just sit down at the bass end. And then we would switch places and he would say, okay, now you play the chord progression and octaves and chords or whatever, and I'm going to improvise the treble notes. So we would switch back and forth. And then eventually things just started falling into place and it started to become a really fun activity.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you really learned in a practical way. You were training your ears, but you were learning by doing, really. Yes,
absolutely. And I had not had any type of ear training at that point in my life specifically. So this was all brand new to me. But yes, the hands-on experience for me, I don't think could have come at a better time, and I don't think it could have been any better of an experience. It was really that important for me.
Great. And How did your musical journey continue? Was that an area that you focused on in the years to come, or were you more taking that confidence back to the sheet music and the more traditional repertoire-based approach?
I didn't specifically focus on playing by ear or improvising so much, because to me, that was just the fun thing that we did when we hung out together. So I wasn't quite making that connection yet. But I went on to major in music, and then I went on to get my master's in music. And here's where the next part of the puzzle fits in. In my master's degree, I was a graduate assistant or a teaching assistant, or I know a lot of different universities call them different things. But one part of my job was to teach beginning piano class. And a couple of the aspects of that class, a couple of the items that the students had to prepare for their piano proficiency were playing by ear in different styles, harmonizing melodies, and reading lead sheets. So at that point, I actually learned the not musical, but I guess the technical side. Here's what a lead sheet looks like. Here's what a chord chart looks like. Here are some actual steps to playing by ear. So the fact that I had to actually teach those things to these young music majors when I myself still wasn't very comfortable with them made me study them a tremendous amount before I would go in the classroom and attempt to say, okay, here's what we do. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So that was sort of the next part of the puzzle. And then since that point was when I started working with my students on the lead sheets and the chord charts. And I just really believe that that is as fundamental of a part of music study as anything else.
That sounds like such a wonderful beginner's piano curriculum. And it sounds like it was fortunate as a part of your own musical journey, because, so many beginner piano courses would be just notes on a page, and they wouldn't even think of introducing the student to a lead sheet early on. Right.
And this was the Alfred Group Piano for Adults piano course for undergraduate music majors who were not piano majors, and I just thought it was fabulous. It had so many things that I was actually a little bit jealous that they were getting to learn all these things, and I had not learned them earlier in my life. So it was really great.
Wonderful. And so you went on to teach piano yourself.
Yes.
And it sounds like you really incorporated this into your own methodology.
Yes, especially right now. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Southwest Virginia. And in this region, we have a lot of bluegrass music and a lot of Appalachian folk music, and jam sessions are huge. Knowing how to read a chart or play a lead sheet or play by ear, those things are incredibly important skills to have in this area, especially for young musicians. And that, especially in the last 7 years since I've lived here, has become a huge part of what I teach in my piano lessons for my students. And as a matter of fact, I have one little girl, she's 12 years old, and a couple of years into her piano lessons, she's been taking lessons for 4 years. This will be year number 5. A couple of years into her piano lessons, as soon as she got comfortable and coordinated enough to play chords, I started introducing her to chord charts. She immediately became successful at playing chord charts because to her, in her mind, her brain understood reading a letter on a page and being able to do something on the piano with that much better than reading the notes on the page and being able to do something with that. So we've taken it and run with it. And she actually plays keyboard and sings lead in church every Sunday now. And she's 12 years old. And I mean,
wow.
It's just wonderful. It's fabulous, and that's sort of what I want all my students to be able to do, is take whatever these tools are that we do in their piano lessons and just go out into the world and have fun.
That's such a great attitude. And it's funny, I think the piano is maybe one of, if not the most extreme instrument for showing that different perspective. Because I think people imagine classical piano and very complex pieces, a lot of notes on the page, and, the concert pianist is juggling so much mentally. And at the same time, it's also a beautiful instrument for thinking in terms of chords. And, the groups of notes I'll play together based on just a lead sheet or just a chord chart. And it's wonderful that you're equipping your students to understand both perspectives.
Well, thank you. I really feel that it's so important. And as a matter of fact, I have two new students. They've had lessons just during this summer, and they're ages 10 and 12. They're sisters. And I started with them in their separate method books. So we've been going through the information, and they've been practicing, and we've been doing all this. And I also started them playing 5-note scales or pentascales, depending on how you phrase it. And I showed them, I sat down and played a song by Adele, just using chords, something that I've memorized the chord progression, and I started playing a little bit of it. And I said, learning those 5-note scales is step one to being able to do what I just did. And their eyes got so big. They were so excited about being able to play all their favorite pop songs really, really soon. So I sort of use it as a little bit of a teaser to say, okay, if you learn all your scales and chords, then we can start learning all these fun songs and it will be amazing. So they love it.
That's great. And I mean, you are officially, in fact, Dr. Melody Payne. You have a doctorate in music education, and I think to some people it would be shocking to hear, a doctor of music education talk in such glowing and passionate and creative terms about the process of learning piano. But I suppose in your doctorate studies, you just went so deep, you understood what really mattered. Would that be the right way to put it?
I think that's a great way to put it. For me, going all the way through school for 10 years to get my doctorate was what I knew I needed to do because I wanted a college teaching position. And I did that for several years. I was a music faculty for several years. And then when I met my husband and we got married and he got relocated to Southwest Virginia, where we are now, there wasn't a place for me to be a music faculty member anymore. So I had to sort of carve out my own business, I guess, become an independent piano teacher once again, which I had not been in quite a while. And I think it was actually such a huge gift to be able to do that here because I learned all the technical aspects of things and all the book knowledge and all of that all the way through school. But even though I'm not currently teaching at a university, I feel like right now, being able to put into practice all of those things that I've learned and being able to get to know each student as an individual and figure out exactly where they are on any given day and go from there and teach them the musical tools that will give each student the best success possible, which, yes, I learned how to do that during my years of graduate school, but I've really learned how to do that since I've been an independent piano teacher again. And that's actually put a lot of the glow back into my voice because I get to spend my afternoons with these wonderful children. And there's nothing like it. There is nothing like it.
Fantastic. So you mentioned their lead sheets and chord charts. And I think for a lot of people in our audience, that would be quite unfamiliar to them. They may be more used to notes on a page. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you help your students kind of familiarize themselves with what it means to play from a lead sheet or a chord chart.
The first thing I do, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, is help them to become familiar with their 5-note scales and then broken and block chords. And as soon as they are comfortable with a few of those, then we start moving into chord charts. And I like the app iReal Pro. That is a fantastic app because it contains a huge library of chord charts. And of course, it has the backing tracks so that you can play along. So usually what I try to do is find one that's very, very simple, that only has 4 or 5 different chords in it so that they can be successful from the start, and maybe has one unfamiliar chord in it so that I can start to teach them things like what a slash chord is, or a 7th chord, or a suspended chord, different things like that. So I actually use the chord charts as teaching tools as well. But I have the students, first of all, just play basic chords with their right hand or their left hand. To me, it doesn't matter what hand they use, as long as they're now starting to get the picture that their hand is going to have to move around on the piano, because for a lot of them, this is the first experience they've had with that skill. So they might be a little timid. Oh, I have to move my hand. What are you talking about? So yes, you have to move your hand, and it's going to be okay. No worries. Just look at the letter and then play the chord that you see. And then I start to explain that each letter gets a certain number of beats, and we just kind of go from there and start layering. Maybe they play a single note with their left hand and the chord with their right hand to create an accompaniment. And that way I teach them that they can sing along, which most of them are like I was when I was a child, and they don't want to sing out loud in front of me, which is okay. So I sing out loud in front of them and help them feel a little better. We all have to be vulnerable sometimes, right? So I just use those chord charts as teaching tools. And then eventually when their reading skills have caught up with their chord skills, then I start to introduce lead sheets. And then I tell them they can just go on different sheet music websites, and they can Google the name of a song, lead sheet, or just find a pop song that they like that has the chords above the staff, and we go from there.
Wonderful. And that must give them so much of a sense of confidence and freedom compared with just saying, like, here is the 2-staff sheet music for a classical piece. Let us learn it note by note. It
does. And, it's really amazing. Some of the parents come to the lessons in my studio. Not all of them do. The kids make them stay outside. But some of the little ones still are okay if their parents come in and take pictures and listen and enjoy. And I have a particular piano mom. Her name is Laura, and she is one of the most supportive and kind piano moms. And her little girl, Hope, just turned 8 years old this summer. And we have started doing chord charts and lead sheets together. And I have looked over on the couch in my studio where the parents sit, and have seen the mom wiping a tear or looking like she's just about to burst with joy. And seeing these little children playing chords and doing things with both hands when they have not done that yet is a huge boost for the parents. Kind of at that moment, I think the parents kind of think, oh my goodness, my kid can really do this. And it's a huge, huge self-esteem boost for the kids too.
That's such a great insight. And it reminds me, back when I learned piano, I started out with a jazz piano curriculum, and I'd learned a few instruments, so I was kind of familiar with sheet music and music theory, but it was still fairly note by note. And then a few years later, I discovered this thing called chord piano, which was kind of, let's learn the triad chords and use those as our building blocks. And like you say, it's not a shortcut, but it does allow you to leap forwards in what you can create musically. And, the sound of the music you're creating is suddenly so much fuller and richer and more flexible compared with going through the, more and more complex note reading.
Yes, absolutely. It is, definitely.
So you've integrated this into your own teaching, but it would be a huge understatement to say you are just running a very successful piano studio now. In fact, you're known worldwide as one of the most prominent music teacher bloggers online. And I hesitate to use the word blogger because it doesn't seem like it does it justice. I'd love to give just a couple of examples of what you publish at melodypayne.com.
Certainly.
Because you're sharing such valuable insights there, both for music teachers and individual music learners.
All right.
Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
So one post that really stood out to me was one called 3 Rules for a Magical Musical Moving Performance. And, just from the title, I was excited because we often focus so much on the instrument technique, we forget about making it sound musical and moving and even creating a bit of magic with it. So could you share a little bit about that post and what you were communicating there?
Absolutely. A little bit of that post stemmed back from when I was younger. And like I said, I was very type A, I was very perfectionist, so I wanted to do exactly what my teachers asked me to do. But when they said things like play musically or play from your heart or play with feeling, I didn't know what that meant. I had 2 concrete of a personality. I needed black and white instructions. How do you play musically? But I didn't quite understand that it was okay if I asked that question. I just thought I wasn't getting it. But like I said, I went through grad school, went through college, kept playing piano as a high school student, and eventually I understood what it meant when the teacher was saying play with feeling or play from your heart. And I started putting it together that, there is actually a step-by-step process I can use. Thank goodness, this is so much easier. And so that's why I came up with this blog post, is because I break it down to the very simplest form of learning how to play musically. And this is how I teach all my little ones from early on in their piano lessons, how to play musically. I mean, from the very first lesson, I teach them, I call them the music rules, and I tell them this is what music wants to do. And when you help the music do what it wants to do, it makes your playing sound so amazing, and obviously make a big deal about it when you're telling these little kids. And they'll try anything because they have much less inhibition and they're less self-conscious. So they'll try it, and it's wonderful. And I've actually, as I said in this particular blog post, I've had a mom during the interview be moved to tears because her child played musically in the interview. And all because I introduced what I call the very first rule of music, which is usually the last note of a piece of music is the softest. And I say, now, if the last note is fireworks, we do not play the last note the softest. But if the piece of music is about a kitten, or if it's about whatever it's about, generally speaking, the last note is the softest. So I teach them a piece of music by rote. We play the duet. And I help them to understand that if you get softer at the end, it makes the piece of music you're playing sound finished. And that's the first basic concrete step that I use to teach my students to play musically. And it works great for older students as well. It doesn't have to be just for 8-year-olds. Anyone, doesn't matter what age, 8 years old through 80 years old, can use that rule to make their playing sound more musical. And then from there, I began to move on into a couple of other rules, and we build from there, and eventually incorporating those concrete rules of musicality begins to feel natural. And it's at that point that the real music making starts to happen, I think.
That's wonderful. And I think what I particularly loved about that post was that you weren't afraid to simplify and generalize. I think a lot of music teachers, they would hesitate to give that kind of advice because they know that, okay, there are times where it won't be the quietest note in the piece that's at the end. And the reality is that a set of rules like that is a huge head start in finding your own musicality and understanding how do you make something sound more musical. And so I love that you were willing to step out there and say, look, these 3 rules are a really great place to start.
Well, thank you. And they actually helped me as I was going through the process myself of figuring out my own musicality. Because up until that point, well, I'm going to use a very strong word here, but up until that point, I felt like an imposter. I did not feel like a real musician because I did not understand what it meant to play musically, or to play with feeling, or to play from the heart. And so now when I never want any of my own students to feel like an imposter. So giving them these tools that they can use in the lesson or at home or wherever they are, they're simple enough and they are basic enough, but they pack a huge punch.
That's so empowering. So the other post I wanted to touch on is one of the kind of hot topics, I think, for pianists, because we're often called upon to step up and accompany someone, or equally, we might be a singer as well, and we want to be able to just sit down at the keyboard and play as we sing. And you wrote a terrific post called Accompanying 101, 10 Tips for Beginning Accompanists. Could you tell us a bit about that one and where it came from and what you share in that post?
Yes, absolutely. I have myself been an accompanist in one fashion or another since high school. And a lot of the tips that I present in this post are things that I've just learned and figured out on my own along the way. And when I was in undergrad, I accompanied for a lot of people's voice lessons. So I wasn't only in my own piano lessons learning from my teacher, I was in voice lessons and trumpet lessons and clarinet lessons and anything else. And I was paying attention to what all of their professors were saying as well. So when the professor told me, okay, we need you to do this here, I took it to heart and I said, okay, well, I'm not only going to do that here, I'm going to do it everywhere the music does that. So as I continued through undergrad and continued accompanying, it wasn't really occurring to me that I was learning things about being an accompanist that I might one day be able to offer to other people. So a few years ago, one of my high school students was asked to accompany her high school choir's Christmas concert. And she had never done that before, but she's a fantastic pianist. She's actually starting her junior year majoring in music right now, so I'm very proud of her. But she brought her music that the choir director at her high school had given to her, and she said, "What do I do? I'm practicing it, but I'm sure that just practicing these songs will not be enough." So we focused on accompanying skills for about a month in her piano lessons. And the first 5 things on the list were on my original blog, and I had originally blogged about that after working with my student Rebecca. And then I recently updated it, moved it to my new blog at melodypayne.com, and added 5 more tips. And I just feel like if you're as prepared as you can be as an accompanist and you put a lot of these tips into practice, then you're going to have the most successful first experience accompanying that you can. So if you are following these tips, then I feel like you won't go in there not knowing what to expect at all. I feel like it at least can help you prepare a little bit for what's going on at the first rehearsal.
That's great. And I think it's really close to a running theme here, which is you specialize, I think, in helping people get off the book and going beyond what just the notes on the page are telling them to do. And I think maybe the trap a lot of people fall into with accompanying is they think as long as I play the accompaniment perfectly according to the score, I've done my part. And I think in that article, you're showing that actually it's a skill in itself.
Yes, absolutely it is. And for me particularly, one thing I'd like to mention is that there was a particular piece of music that I was given to play for our high school choir. I accompany our high school choir here in my town. And the accompaniment in the left hand had huge 4-note chords. Well, I have a tendency to get tendonitis in my left thumb and my left wrist if I'm playing too many big chords and the piece is very fast, which this particular one was. So I had to come up with ways to protect the health of my wrist and my thumb. So that meant leaving out a few notes. That meant maybe playing the octaves or maybe just playing a 3-note triad instead of a 4-note huge chord. And being a good accompanist also encompasses being able to make the changes that you need to make for your own physical health, but still be able to provide the music that is necessary to support the singers or other musicians that you're accompanying.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful example because it shows the importance of the skills we were talking about earlier, understanding piano in terms of chords and understanding how to find the right notes or change the notes, having practiced that more creative and improvisational and play by ear side of things. I think you're much more empowered as an accompanist to say, okay, I'm not going to play exactly what's written because that's not the best for this situation.
Absolutely. And another example of that is if there's a very difficult passage. I know a lot of times in a lot of the more modern choral arrangements, there might be a pause in the singing, and then the piano just goes off and does all of this fancy stuff. But it might also occur in the middle of a page turn. And, well, all of that is not possible unless you memorize everything and you turn your page 4 measures early or 4 measures late. And so sometimes what I do if I encounter a situation like that is I use chord symbols. And if it's an arpeggio, I don't worry about memorizing the arpeggio. I just see my different chord symbols as I'm turning the page with the opposite hand, and I just play something that is in those chords. The harmonies are there. And it's okay if I, as an accompanist, don't play every single note that's written into the piano score. And it took me a while to get to that point because there is a fear of, oh my goodness, we can't leave notes out. Someone composed those notes. We cannot leave them out. But someone who arranged the music on the page might not have put the page turn in the best spot. So we have to do what we have to do in order to still be able to accompany the musicians and not get left behind because we're fumbling around in our page turn in the middle of the big arpeggio section.
For sure. And I think if you're listening to this and you're feeling inspired, I know a lot of people listening will be in that situation of feeling constrained to playing the notes they're told to play and craving that ability to go beyond the notes on the page and to take ownership of which notes they choose to play when to perfectly suit the musical situation. If you're feeling inspired and interested and all of that resonates with you, I'd highly encourage checking out melodypayne.com. You know, those were just 2 examples of blog posts she wrote there. And there's a vast treasure trove of information about these kinds of skills and how to learn them, even how to teach them. And of course, there's also a whole store of resources for music teachers in particular, if you want to introduce this kind of thing into your own music teaching. So thank you so much, Melody, for joining us today and sharing about your own experiences and also these insights on what can transform someone, I think, from a robotic player who feels terrified in performance situations because they don't know what to do if they don't play exactly the right notes, into someone who feels relaxed and confident and capable, as you explained, to even move the audience to tears through their own musicality. So I'm so happy to have you with us on the show today. Thank you for sharing so openly. Do you have any final words of advice, or maybe you could tell the audience where to head if they want to know more about your approach and dig more into all of these concepts?
Well, my website is melodypayne.com, and my blog is located there. Actually, the melodypayne.com website is the hub of everything that I do. So if you go there, then you'll be able to see any branch of whatever is going on for me musically or professionally in any way. And I feel that it's important to meet the students where they are and to be able to take them from that point in any given lesson on any given day to the next step, whether that point is learning music rule number 1, or whether that point is figuring out how to analyze a Beethoven sonata, or whether that point is learning how to play a chord chart for the first time to play a favorite pop song. So being able to break things down into the easiest digestible form is something that I believe that is necessary for not just piano teachers, but for music teachers or for any kind of teacher for that matter. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to share that with everyone. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Our pleasure. And we'll have links to Melody's website and her music resources store and everything we've mentioned in this episode in the show notes. Thank you again, Melody.
The Musicality podcast is brought to you by Musical U. Learn more at musical-u.com.
Awesome. I was so grateful to Melody for being willing to open up like that about her own early music learning and how trapped she felt early on by relying on sheet music and being afraid to make mistakes. If you could relate to that, I'm sure you're feeling revved up by hearing about her transformation and the results she's been helping her students to get too. Let's recap the major points there. Melody started getting off book by just sitting down with a friend and trying to copy what they were doing on the keyboard. She gradually learned more freedom and creativity to play what she heard, and then she wanted to integrate that into her own teaching so that her students and blog readers could break free of the sheet music themselves. It's never too early or too late to learn these skills. Just knowing simple chords and pentascales can equip you to tackle chord charts and lead sheets. She told us how she uses those 2 skills and an app called iReal Pro to give her students chord charts for the songs they love, and then they're able to quickly play their own versions of those songs without needing the full sheet music. Of course, it's not enough to just choose the right notes. Melody talked about bringing real musicality to a performance and how a few simple rules can demystify this and give you a great head start in sounding musical. I loved hearing her example of a young student whose mum was literally brought to tears because she was so impressed with what her daughter had been able to quickly do in music. We'll have links to Melody's tips for a musical performance and for accompanying in the show notes for this episode, and those are just 2 examples of the amazing blog posts and tutorials available on her website, melodypayne.com, and that's Payne spelled Payne, melodypayne.com. An excellent name for a music educator, by the way. If you're feeling inspired, then as well as checking out Melody's website, how about putting some of her ideas into practice this week? You could find a musical friend and have a very relaxed, informal jam session. Practice ear training in a very practical way by just trading riffs or trying to copy one another by ear. Or grab an app like iReal Pro, which provides chord charts, and see if you can come up with an arrangement of your own for your favorite song. Oh, and next time you make a mistake in music, remember the mindset of going off book. With a bit of prep work in advance, you can make sure you know which notes to pick in that moment to recover gracefully. And in any case, remember that a wrong note does not have to mean the end of the world, or even the end of the piece. Thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for our next episode where we're going to talk more about recovering from mistakes and overcoming stage fright.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's